I'm tempted to say welcome back to Kenley Aerodrome because we did a film here in early 22. I'm here again with Linda Duffield from the Kenley Revival. And this is really a special episode, if you like, in the journey where we look at what's been put in place for the Royal Canadian Air Force 100-year celebration. So it's their anniversary. That was on the 1st of April, I think, yep. Linda. And when we complete the circuit, we'll show you a maple tree that was planted and dedicated recently. So we're going to have a walk round, pick out some of the sites, and basically just have a natter as we go. Let's get on our way.
So the trail that we've done is similar to the one we did a couple of 2 or 3 years ago now for the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Britain, except that we've added in some bit of extra information rather than just doing all the boards for the fallen. We've got all of our Canadian fallen on here, 47 Canadians, plus 2 Americans, 1 British guy and a Barbadian who were serving in Canadian units. So we've added them to the trail because they're with Canadian units. And we've added in a couple more information boards as well, just to set the scene and so that people kind of understand when all this was happening. And this first one highlights the fact that it was the Canadians that cleared the land. It's something we're working on at the moment. It was the Canadian Forestry Corps, and we found the unit that we think cleared this land.
Right, so right back at the beginning.
Yes,
so when
1917.
When it's the early days of the whole operation here.
Yes.
Canadians were here.
Yes, and they
before their air force.
They created the airfield. They created the airfield, the Canadian Forestry Corps. And I mean, I've put that picture there of sort of like them there with an axe chopping down the tree and all the rest of it. But actually, the Canadian Forestry Corps were incredibly efficient. And I mean, obviously, they were clearing lumber to be used for entrenchment and so on and so forth on the Western Front. Timber was needed.
Yeah.
And that was their primary work. And then there were specialist units that were clearing land for airfields. And they did it incredibly quickly. And I think they may have been involved in this early building work, if you know what I mean, or the kind of preparation of the land for the buildings. They used sort of small gauge railways and all sorts of stuff. You know, that it was quite an efficient operation. I don't, you know, it wasn't
highly
kind of
resourceful.
Like, you know, a couple of lumberjacks turning up and kind of doing it all really slowly. But the land here was a beauty spot. It was very well loved. The local community were up in arms over it, and you know, part of it was the common, part of it was a golf course, obviously over by Gulf Road, and some of it was farmland. So you know, it was a kind of combination of things. But yeah, they were here from literally the word go. At the end of the First World War, there's a tremendous number of Canadians in the Royal Air Force. And, you know, some of them stay in, some new guys come in the 20s and everything, but they're hard to find because they're recorded as British citizens because Canada's a dominion.
Yeah.
So, you know, when they turn up, it's kind of like, but this in 1919, you know, we've got the communication squadrons here, the Paris Peace Conference is going on, and we've got these 2 Canadian guys, Harry Yates and Jimmy Vance. And if anything from Kenley's history should be made into a film, it's this flight. It is absolutely bonkers what they do. The record then for a flight from London to Cairo is 15.5 days. And they do it in 5, with something like about 30 hours actually in the air. And everything happens to them. Their maps are stolen. The maps they're given by the Air Ministry are 15 foot by 4 foot. At this point, and then that map gets stolen, and they have to like go to the local library and get an encyclopedia out and trace the maps they want, and they're navigating by these traced maps. Their fuel pump packs up. The guy they're carrying to Cairo is Harry St. John Bridger Philby, who is Kim Philby's dad.
Right.
You know the spy, Kim Philby? Yeah, it's his dad.
Wow.
And then they get stranded like in Crete, and they pick up Lawrence of Arabia. It's just
it's
nuts.
More than a boy's own tale.
It is.
Really.
It is.
And, like you say, make a film.
Meanwhile, Harry Yates has been given this flight to do. He's only been given 6 months to live. He's got some stomach problem. He had like yards of his stomach removed, and he thinks he's only got 6 months to live. He ends up living another 50. I think he dies in about 1960. He outlives the predictions by about 50 years.
Wow.
And he's still got a pilot's license in 1951. Imagine that. And those Handley Page 0400s, they're about roughly the size of a B-17, so a Flying Fortress.
Yeah.
Except they're not metal. They're wood and fabric. So you can imagine how fragile they are for that size. They lose their tail skid, they have burst tyres, there's nobody there, they have to land on a dry riverbed, and they're so sort of frightened about making this landing that they shake hands before they go into land. And this is all on aerial route number 1, which is this crazy idea where the RAF have got this idea of transporting loads of Handley Page 0400s down to Cairo via this route. And there's nobody there.
No.
There's nobody. There's no logistics. There's no fuel. There's no ground crew. There's just nothing. It's completely bonkers. Anyway, you know, after that, into the 20s and the 30s, there's the Royal Canadian Air Force. Although it's kind of been formed, it's still really a really small operation, and they aren't really doing they're like a flying club, if you know what I mean, even more than the RAF is at that point. And you find that there's still a lot of Canadians joining the RAF rather than the RCAF, because the Royal Canadian Air Force requires you to have a degree and the RAF don't. So you get these Canadians like Horace Horn there, who join up on a short service commission, because in the Great Depression trying to find work in Canada is difficult, and he'd managed to get himself a private pilot's license, and he comes over here, gets his short-term commission, does his service, goes back to Canada, and the only work he can find is as an orderly in a mental hospital. And he's pretty soon had enough of that, and he heads back to England to rejoin the RAF as his call-up papers for the war are coming the other way. And he ends up back in the RAF and fights during the Battle of France. By the end of the Battle of France, he's absolutely exhausted and suffering from PTSD. He's sent down to Torquay to recuperate, and he basically spends the rest of the war instructing. The story of him and his wife, his Canadian girlfriend, comes over to England to marry him with her wedding cake across the Atlantic, the submarine, the U-boat infested waters of the Atlantic, and here comes Kathy with her wedding cake.
But it survived.
Yes.
Brilliant.
But they tested the
Destined
sugar.
to be.
They tested the sugar content when she got to England because of the rationing and everything. They get married, and he survived the war, and they raised a family, and everything went swimmingly well after that. But it means that basically the first 6 of these Canadian lads that are killed at Kenley are in RAF units, not in the RCAF.
Right. So 253 Squadron
Yeah,
RAF.
this is Alec Truman, who's buried down at...
So a Canadian national, but
yes.
RAF.
Yeah, but they all joined up pre-war in the RAF because the RCAF was small. The RAF was getting ready for war, so they were recruiting like mad. And people thought they'd see more action and fly more modern aircraft if they came over here.
Some work being done on the Google Maps, like an interactive map.
Yeah.
So you can go online, and actually all of these signs that we're seeing here, you can click on each of those, the exact location, and you get the details of the airmen.
Yes.
Which is brilliant.
Yep.
Great work being done there.
I do that because sometimes when we did the Battle of Britain, when we had families coming in who wanted to just come and see their relatives board.
Right.
And so I kind of had a map where I could say, they're on the end of the runway there, and kind of give them a kind of precise idea of where they were.
And with this trail, Linda, like any visitor here, there's 3-4 entrances, is it?
Yes.
So basically, wherever you can park, they're made clear, I think, on the map anyway, aren't they? But actually, I think is there indicated as a trail start, I think, on the actual interactive map?
Yes,
so there's one for Hayes Lane.
Yes, there's intro. There's sort of like a basic introductory board at the main entrances to the common, and the trail actually kind of chronologically starts at the Tribute and runs clockwise.
Right.
Here's another one of our St Luke's guys.
Yes.
Leonard Joseph Burke. He flew into the side of Titsy Hill.
And we've got the QR codes there. So
yes, people can all link it back and get more information if they want it. Although I think most people run around and look at one or two boards every time they come round.
Yeah.
It is nice to send them back to the families in Canada, though,
Oh, certainly.
when we're in touch with them.
So the gates are open and people are on the runway, so I'm
Yes.
guessing we're not going to see any glider activity for a while,
No.
or at all today.
Yeah.
That's the added bonus whenever you come to Kenley, is see the odd takeoff and landing from the glider.
Yeah, you either get the joy of seeing the gliders or you get the joy of walking out on the runways. Either way, it's good stuff.
This has to be one of the best locations if you wanted to do any form of visualisation of life at that time. You know, this, to all intents and purposes, this is an active airfield in terms
Yes.
of the gliding and the
Yes.
glider school, but you can almost sense it sometimes.
Yes.
It's almost, you know, stop and just have a bit of reflection, you know,
Yes.
when you're here.
No, it
read
is.
the boards, and I think you could kind of just get a feel for the place.
Yes, indeed. And I mean, it's sort of, we tend to focus a lot, I think, on buildings, you know, but actually the fact that we've still got the runways,
Yeah.
it's all that concrete out there that's important. That runway, that's really the thing that Kenley has that most other Battle of Britain airfields, that it's just gone.
I mean, Croydon's got its nice building, terminal building.
Yes.
But there's no space
But there's
there.
no
really.
airfield.
There's no
You
land
can't
there.
visualise where the airfield was. Whereas this, you can see, and you can see that big sky that they took off into,
Yeah.
and that's very, as you say, it can be very haunting.
Mm.
And you can imagine them, you know, racing out of the dispersals and out onto the runway, and up and away, kind of thing. It's and you can imagine standing out here and waiting for them to come home.
Yeah.
You know, you can imagine being one of the ground crew and sitting out in that dispersal and you know, just that anxious time.
Because they really had a connection with their
They did,
pilots,
yes,
didn't they?
they did. Here's the start of our Canadian wing. Towards the end of 1942, 402 Squadron arrived, the first Canadian squadron to arrive here. And really from then on, it's mainly Canadian squadrons here. There is a short period in the summer of 1943 when the Canadians go off and practice being a mobile unit down at Headcorn and Lashenden and Staplehurst, servicing the aircraft, doing sorties from a mobile unit, living under canvas, and all of
in
that.
Preparation for,
in preparation for
D-Day,
D-Day, yes. And while they're gone, 66 Squadron and I think 165 come in here and do about 30 or so sorties between about August and October. Those are British squadrons, but apart from that, right up until the time when the airfield's closed to flight, when the balloon barrage encroaches, it's all Canadians. 8 Canadian units from then on. And the RCAF is expanding so quickly at this point. It's scaling up very, very rapidly. British Commonwealth Air Training Plan is just bringing in, you know, they're training British pilots as well.
Yeah.
And from everywhere else, you know, and we've got that great advantage over the enemy, that we've got friendly skies where we can train our airmen, which they don't have.
No.
And this is just a big advantage. Billy Bishop there, the Great War Race, he did a lot of recruiting kind of drives for them. It was, you know, he was the big face of the sort of recruitment for the RCAF. Of course, his son, Arthur Bishop, I think he was with 401 Squadron over at Biggin Hill, and he was just the unluckiest guy. He had so many accidents. It turned into a bit of a joke because his dad was this kind of amazing VC Great War ace, and he was kind of, they always joked that he destroyed more British aircraft than enemy aircraft, if you know what I mean. His book is a good read, Arthur Bishop's book. It's a very good read. He's very sort of self-deprecating.
Canadian presence overall in the army, for example, all around our area, I say the wider areas, where we are.
Yes.
I mean, even in the road next to where I live, those houses were built in the 1930s.
Yes.
The first occupants, after the builders had completed them, were the Canadian Army.
Yes.
And so they were
there's
very
a huge
local.
presence.
Yeah.
There's a huge presence here. There's over in Matlock Road, which isn't pointing kind of in the vague direction of Matlock Road. They got a direct hit on a billet there, and 4 Canadian soldiers were killed. There's the Canadian truck that got hit on Titsy Hill. That killed about 6 or I can't remember how many, about half a dozen guys killed there. And then, of course, you've got this whole interaction between the local community and the WAFs and everything with the Canadian soldiers. So we get quite a high number of Canadian war brides coming from this area, and then they go back out to Canada after. There's some extraordinary stories from them. All the Canadian war brides had the right to go to Canada,
Right.
Whether their husbands had survived or not. But they very rarely actually travelled at the same time as their husbands. So you get instances of sort of like a war bride arriving with her in-laws and a young child 6 months before her husband, is released from service and gets back from Italy or wherever, and they haven't seen it. There's a girl called Doris Field. I've got her whole story on the website. When she is reunited with her husband in Canada, in this completely strange place where she's got no family, they haven't seen each other for 2 years.
Wow.
They meet in Caterham, and then they've got to kind of forge a life together. Yeah. But of course, he's been through the whole horror of.
Don't know each other.
No,
I think you have to relearn to
yes,
have a relationship again.
And she says that by this point he was suffering with PTSD. They couldn't really relate to each other at all, and he ends up spending a lot of his time just down at the Legion with his army friends, because he just feels completely alienated from home life and everything else.
So there was a comfort with being with his mates, his colleagues.
Yes, but the war brides
Something
themselves.
That he used.
The war brides themselves are kind of like completely isolated culturally and from their communities and everything. It's an extraordinary thing. Some of them end up coming home, but a lot of them stay and really kind of like form the bedrock of the communities that they're living in. They have a tremendous influence. Oh, this is the one British guy.
John Asker.
Asker. Yeah, I can't find out a huge amount about him, and he doesn't actually get mentioned in the ops book at all. The only way I found out about him was from Alistair Skinner's diary. And I've put it there. He had quite a shock this AM. At 5:30, was walking to my kite when an RAF chap on the squadron walked into a prop on A flight and was killed. As it says there, they collected £35 for his wife and family. John Tan, whose grandfather was stationed here not so very long after this happened, and he said it was still being talked about on the squadron even a couple of months later. John thinks that he hadn't been in the service for that long. But I mean, what a shock for everybody. And it obviously was a big shock for the pilot.
We got Neil from the team. Neil Broughton's joined us, so he's just out here for a stroll, and we happened to bump into you, didn't we? Neil's just joined us. He's also been part of the team that not only what we'll be focusing today, but loads of other work here as well at Kenley. You've been involved in countless projects. Well, the pair of you have. It's that dedication that I think that really does make it worthwhile.
We should talk about this chap.
Flying Officer Junius Lyman E. Hoken.
Yep, 401 Squadron. He is believed to be the first Canadian-born black pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force. It's really interesting because I didn't even realise. I'd researched him and written him up and had no idea about his ethnicity at all. Another researcher sort of highlighted it to me, and when I went back through, the only indication of any kind of question over his race is a star next to his father's nationality. His father was Hawaiian, and there's a red star next to it. He's an incredibly bright lad. He's incredibly talented, and there's at the end of his sort of assessment, it says, accepted without doubt, as long as there are no questions about his background, or something, words to that effect. And it's really interesting, because unless you really thought about every line on that thing, you wouldn't spot anything on the paperwork that would indicate that he was black. He was working on a navigational spherent for bombers when he was killed, and in fact they were about to take him off ops when he was lost on the Morlaix disaster, which is a horrific thing where a whole squadron was lost basically because of a mix-up with the weather report. They thought the wind was in one direction, and in fact they were flying, the wind was in the opposite direction and pushing them back, and they all ran out of fuel. There was cloud cover. The American guys thought they could see Britain, and in fact they were looking at France. They all went through the hole in the cloud down and got picked off by the anti-aircraft gunners, I think in the harbour at Brest.
So it was actually a combination of things that led to the absolute
worst
possible
absolutely. It was absolute worst case scenario, and bless him, poor Lyman ended up just, saying that that's it, I'm going in the sea, that's it. He just ran out of fuel on the way back because he was flying into a headwind, a massive headwind. Really, really sad. And
tailwind in the right direction will have given perhaps some chance, some control.
Yes. No, it's just a whole series of mishaps that lead to his loss. But he's one of those real talents where you think, goodness, he probably could have achieved a great deal if he'd lived.
Yeah.
His list of effects after he's died, there's slide rules and this, that and the other. He's obviously got a very busy mind.
Yes.
Horace Horn, the chap who served during the Battle of France and afterwards became an instructor, there's a letter that he wrote to his father where he talks quite candidly to his dad about what he'd been through during the Battle of France. And he says that before setting off on a sortie, he would quite often feel a writhing in his stomach, and this fear that he was going to meet a horrible death, but he'd just, strap himself in and get on with it. By the end of the Battle of France, though, it was telling on him, and Kathy, his wife, in fact, says when she meets him, when he returns from France, he comes back and he's riddled with lice, he has sores in his mouth, and he's really in a bad way, physically as well as mentally.
Yeah.
All that stress is taking a toll on his body as well as his mind. I mean, it has to be said that the RAF were very good at kind of rotating their squadrons in and out of the combat zone and kind of resting people and, taking them out if they, weren't coping and all of this stuff. There was kind of like a real way of rotating people and trying to minimise the strain on them. The RAF seems to be much better at that than the Luftwaffe, who just kept people in the combat area the whole time without any relief. And we've just come across William Kennedy, Ferguson. He was shot down over France. That photograph is his evasion photograph. All of the pilots, when they arrived here, it was kind of like one of those indicators that they knew they'd arrived. Things were hotting up and they were actually going to be at the sharp end of everything, was that they'd be issued with a sidearm. And they'd have these photographs taken where they'd be dressed in something that was akin to a French peasant, and they would have that photograph with them when they went into combat. If they did fall into the hands of the Maquis or the resistance in France, they'd have a photograph that could be used to forge ID. But it was one of those things that they kind of realised, okay, things are getting serious here. That's his photograph of him masquerading as a French peasant. He came down nearby and the village where they've got streets named after him and everything. He's kind of their pilot now. The Canadian records are really interesting to go through because they ask a lot of questions that the RAF records don't. My favourite box on the Canadian forms is one right at the end of the first page of the attestation form where they say, what do you want to do after the war is over? What do you want to do? And the variety of stuff that is put in that box is amazing. There's a chap, I think he's on the other side of the runway here. He wants to become a concert baritone singer. And other people want to teach, other people want to fly commercially, some want to stay in the RCAF. You know, there's all this kind of like aspiration, ambition, and you know, all these hopes and dreams, all in this little one box at the bottom of this form. And it's heartbreaking because you know that you're reading this as someone who's, you know, a couple of years' time they're going to be killed in action, or, you know, in a flying accident or something. I wish we had a bit more information like that from the RAF guys as well. This is Alistair McLean Skinner. It's his diary that tells us about the death of Bert Asker, the ground crew chap who walked into the prop blade. And he's quite a character. His diary is very revealing, and he, you know, he's gossiping about everyone and having a good old moan. And I've learned a lot reading his diary. He's an amazing chap. He's got this really fancy flying glove on, and I don't know.
Is it a smoking glove? He's got a cigarette in his hand.
I've no idea what's going on.
It's my special smoking glove.
Yeah, I don't know. But he's
character.
in flying kit. He's in his Mae West and everything there, so I don't know what's going on. But yeah, he's an interesting chap, and yeah, as I say, he's got a very gossipy diary. You know, most of them don't say much in their diaries, but his is quite, you know, gossipy. He's not very happy with everything on the squadron, you know, and he has a good old moan about everything. It's Sonny. He was one of the chaps that is in Lillian Buchanan's album. In fact, it's an evasion photo, like the one we saw of William Kennedy Ferguson, and he looks so much older in that photo than he does in this one. He's obviously aged him visibly by that point. John Clark Fee, he had a lot of hours as an instructor, but when he came over here and came into combat, he rose up the ranks very, very quickly and became the leader of the Kenley wing, and then was sort of shot down almost immediately. Sonny was his number 2 and was taken down as well. I think they were keen to have a Canadian in charge of the wing.
Yes.
And it maybe it was just, to me, it always just looks just too fast, you know, for him to become a wing leader. I don't know, is he, you know, maybe he didn't have enough combat experience or whatever, but yeah, all a bit tragic. This is Robert Jack Tupp. He's the opera singer. He's a concert baritone singer. And this photo was taken by Doc Thorne, their medical officer, I think when they were down at Red Hill. And Stephen Thorne, Doc Thorne's son, visited. He wrote a beautiful article for the Legion magazine about Kenley and about, you know, the guys that his dad knew. You know, it's very close to his heart. And in fact, Stephen's an amazing photographer, and weirdly, his dad took some incredible photos of the guys, and obviously they're very relaxed around him.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the key, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
I think this also brings it home that we do think of the Battle of Britain almost too much sometimes. You know, this is about the operations on foreign soil, isn't it?
Yes.
This is going out there
Yes.
with targets to find in France and the like, and as we've seen a few times just in this area, they were picked off. You know, they were caught.
Well, they're suffering from all the same disadvantages that the Luftwaffe had suffered from in 1940.
Yes.
The limitations of fuel,
Yeah.
Fighting over enemy-occupied territory. You know, if they bail out, they're going to fall into enemy hands. They're not bailing out over their own territory anymore. They're either going to be prisoner of war or killed, one way or the other. It's a tough war for them.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's these endless bomber escorts and trying to lure the Luftwaffe up into combat, and just this grinding it out, wearing down the Luftwaffe, wearing down the transport resources for the enemy, and, you know, destroying locomotives and goods yards, and, you know, it's not very it's a long and dangerous war for them.
Gradually sprinkling sand in the gears of the war machine over time, isn't it?
Yes. But I mean,
It's difficult to measure the amount of one little raid, but it's you have to do it continuously.
Yes, yeah, and it must have been, wearisome for them.
Yeah.
Orland Brown, he's kind of pretty unremarkable in most of his story is pretty much the same as everyone else's and all the rest of it. But I realised that I think he might be the only shepherd that we've got. They made a film of the shepherd, Frederick Forsyth story, about a fighter, or in that case a mosquito, escorting crippled bombers back. And at the end of the new John Travolta version of it, there's a bit of text that comes up on the screen that says, thanks to all the pilots who who shepherded bombers back home. And I think we were all going, huh? Because this is kind of like something that we don't have any records of this actually happening, of fighters going out after crippled bombers. However, he did. And he was commended by Bomber Command for a sort he did, I think it was July 42. He takes off from Red Hill. He goes out over the Channel and picks up a Wellington for some reason. And this is what he's sorted for. He's sent out with this purpose, and he brings it into Friston and is commended for his action by Group Captain Atcherley and Bomber Command. And it's the only instance I've ever come across of an actual successful shepherding of a bomber home.
Wow.
Of course, he was killed in action. His brother John was also killed in action. So his family lost 2 children, which, I mean, I can't imagine. That photo is clipped from another one with his brother alongside. And in fact, we've got, I'll pull them out as we go around, but we've got several families where there's more than one child killed in World War II.
So here's a name we've definitely heard of.
Yes, yeah, we can't pass Johnny Johnson by. That's the Kenley Canadian Wing's most famous leader and the highest scoring British fighter ace of World War II. And he scored quite a lot of his victories here with the Kenley Wing. He's really the one that knits them into a really strong fighting unit and changes the way they're flying from this sort of old-fashioned Vic formation into this finger 4 thing that's more akin to the way the Luftwaffe flies, so 2 pairs spread out over more distance. And this is how they get the name the Wolf Pack. The Kenley Wing get called the Wolf Pack because they kind of from the ground, the way they're flying kind of looks really spaced out and quite random, but strategically it's actually a lot better.
Effective.
I think though it's worth saying that we've been round most of the airfield now before we've even reached the point where Johnny Johnson joins the Kenley Wing in March 1943. So I think a lot of people think that he was kind of in command the whole way through, and in fact, the spring of 43 before he gets here, and, he leaves in the autumn. And, there's a lot of other stuff going on before he arrives and after he leaves, in fact, But yeah, as far as sort of strategy, tactics and weaving them into a fighting unit, he's the one. The one. He was very much loved, and they all said that he'd play cards with them on the ground, and he knew every filthy song going, and they call him Winco. He was very informal, and it worked really well. The combination of him with the Canadians worked really well. And he came with Sally. Sally's a Kenley dog.
Yeah.
The funding for the trail came from the Royal Canadian Air Force Association, who kindly gave us a little bit of money to do the trail with, to remember the Canadian airmen.
That's good.
Yeah, it was very generous of them for the Centenary. I think there was a lot of things going on over in Canada for the Centenary, but I'm not sure how much stuff has been going on over here. This is William Thompson Lane. by all accounts, he was a bit of a joker, and he's one of these people that kept everyone's spirits up and everything. But when he was shot down, you can feel that it's a shock to the squadron.
Yeah.
That he really was mourned by his fellow pilots, and it came as a big shock to everyone that he would get killed, because he was so ebullient and good-humoured. He seems to be one of those people that helped get everyone through it. The other thing being that he had, I think, 3 older brothers who all served in the armed forces during World War II, and his brother Carlton Lane had already been killed in action. So when he was lost, it was the second child in the family. And to make matters worse, his brother was here. His brother, as we said about the Canadian soldiers in the area, so his brother was stationed in the area here, was in the army, and he'd visited the airfield and seen...
So that's Gordon,
Yes,
so he saw him off on his
he
last
saw him off. And then they had to tell him that he was missing.
Yeah. So you think of the Saving Private Ryan type film with the brothers and such. We've got it all over the place here, haven't we?
Yes.
It wasn't some one-off situation at all.
And the thing is, at that point, I think everybody's in the armed forces in that family. There's one brother, I think his name was Raymond, who's still at home. And there was a whole bunch of friends from Copper Cliffs who'd all enlisted together. And another one of those friends, Don Plant, had just been killed on, I think, Lancaster bombers days before Willie was killed. And his dad wrote to the Department of National Defence and said, please don't call the youngest brother up. Leave them with one child. You know, it's too much. Yeah. And they heeded that, and Raymond wasn't called up. And it caused a lot of resentment in him. And I think later in his life, he suffered with alcohol problems and all sorts of things. And it was kind of like one of those things where he almost, the act of not allowing him to enlist almost had an impact on his life as well. And certainly their mother never really recovered from the loss of those 2 boys, Carlton and Willie. Hopefully soon it'll be back in use again as luxury housing.
Very special place.
It is. Very much loved. So around on the corner by where the last hangar stood at Kenley, and this is the board about George Burling, who flew with the Kenley wing. Not for that long. I think he was here for a couple of months. He didn't really fit in very well because he was such a lone wolf, and he had his own ideas of how he wanted to fly and fight. And the whole thing with the Kenley wing at that time was that they flew as a team, that it was a team effort, and you know, everybody had to kind of play their part, and that really wasn't his way at all. He was a very successful and skilled pilot, and a natural and gifted marksman, but he wanted to do his own thing, and he nearly came to grief here. He dived on an enemy aircraft unexpectedly, and his controls froze. He hadn't been flying a Spitfire Mark 9 for very long, and he didn't realise how much speed he would pick up. Basically, at that point, they were kind of getting to the point that in a dive, they could almost end up in that kind of transonic thing where you get control reversal and all your controls freeze or reverse in their function, and you're stuck in a dive.
Wow.
As I say, he ended up in this dive, came back with massive, red eyes from these subconjunctival hemorrhages, and was obviously off flying for a few days, and the Spitfire had to be written off. He'd popped everything. He'd popped all the rivets on the underside and everything.
That's the stuff of a movie on its own.
The thing was that he wanted to do his own thing. Godfroy, who by this point was the wing commander, had promoted him to lead a flight after Southwood was killed. And Burling did not want to be promoted. He just wanted to do his own thing. He always rebelled against this kind of service discipline. He didn't want to be a leader of men. He just wanted to get out there and be a fighter pilot. And because Godfroy had promoted him, he started acting up and doing all these low-level aerobatics in the squadron hack Tiger Moth, and was beating up the airfield and everything. And in the end, it put Godfroy in an awful position, really, because he couldn't be seen to be kind of letting George Burling just do what he liked because he was a famous ace, And he ended up sort of threatening him with court-martial, and obviously George Burling was taken away and given to the 126 wing over at Biggin Hill, which were in, Buck McNair, who'd also served here, was in charge there, and, see if he could fit in better there.
See what you can do with this maverick guy.
Yeah, no, but in the end, he just can't, it comes to a tragic end.
Lovely colorised photo, isn't it?
It is amazing. And I mean, we always look at those amazing eyes of George Burling. You can see, that he's absolutely got that kind of marksman's eye. And we never look at Bob Middlemiss, who's on the other side of the table there. He was an incredible pilot in his own right, and a great leader of men. And it's kind of a really interesting photo because you've got this guy who's a great leader of men and a guy who's an absolutely ace fighter pilot. Yeah. And I mean, everyone says, oh, he was a loner, he was this, he was that, with George Burling. But he's teetotal. He's a committed Christian. He just wants to do his own thing, his own way. And I don't think it's that, that he's, kind of this intentionally being a lone wolf. He just doesn't quite fit in with the other guys, Take your flowers down, Jim, before they get really nasty. This is Jim Lambert's board. It was his family that came up for the tree planting.
Right.
So it was members of both the Lambert family and the Fielden family that came that day, and they're the ones that put the flowers here for him. Jim was killed 2 weeks after his wedding. In fact, that's his wedding photo. And he'd already had a tough time in Malta, and he was on his first sortie leading 421 Squadron. So it just must have been horrendous all round, really.
So he gained some experience and then given command, and
yes,
the first time.
Yeah.
Tragic.
Yeah. Okay, this is Claude Weaver, who was the youngest fighter ace, Allied fighter ace of World War II. He packed an awful lot into a very short life, and goodness knows how old he actually was. The CWGC say he was 19 when he was killed. By my reckoning, he's either, by his own dates that he puts on his forms, he's 21 when he's killed, but his mother gives his birth date a year later, so I think he probably really is 20 just. He'd been taken prisoner of war, became an ace over Malta, so he's another one of these, like Jim Lambert and Valentine and George Burling. He's one of these ones that's coming back after fighting in Malta. Godfroy gives a really amazing description of him when he wrote his book Lucky 13, that he, after reading what he'd been through with being taken prisoner of war and then escaping on his third attempt and being really badly beaten up by the Italians and all this stuff, that he was expecting him to be quite a kind of cowed down figure. And he arrived and he was sort of tall and upright, and his uniform was immaculate, and there was nothing indicating that he'd ever been in combat except for a DFM ribbon under his wings. And by all accounts, he was just incredibly brave and incredibly reckless, and that was his undoing here. He's another one too whose his brother was killed at Iwo Jima in 1945. He's an American. So he's one of our American guys who sign up with the Royal Canadian Air Force.
Right.
Obviously, some of them do that so early that they're putting their American citizenship at risk. 12 outright aerial victories. Dick Dennison, he crash landed at Penshurst. He'd had quite a long service and, you know, was a good pilot, instructor and everything.
Non-operational flight. I mean, this is a thing,
Yes.
it wasn't always operational, was it?
There's so many accidents. And I mean, we'll get to that. Our last chap up here, Cliff Pennock, this is just awful, because by this point they're doing dive bombing operations. They're practicing dive bombing here. And again, we've already talked about this kind of problem with these steep dives in the Spitfire 9. They're gaining a lot of speed, you're experiencing a lot of G. And Cliff Pennock, the last fighter pilot killed at Kenley in the war years, that's what happens to him. He does his dive bombing practice, he pulls up and he just keeps pulling up and goes right over and then crashes straight into the ground. And he's obviously blacked out. It's hard to say exactly where he came down. I think it says a ploughed field or something like that in the ops book. My suspicion is always that he's somewhere over towards in the fields, somewhere over the back of the dispersals by the Wattenden Arms, somewhere over that direction. But I don't know. I've got nothing to prove that. Again, he was married. He had a wife back in Canada. She had I think a little boy after he died. And again, that was another one that shocked everyone very much, because they all saw it happen.
Yes.
It was here, it all happened here. And you can just imagine that, seeing them coming in, diving on the airfield, and then, you know, just watching this whole thing going, come on. And it sounds, from what they say, it almost sounds like he almost loops around and almost makes it back around again, but just can't, just goes into the ground. And he is down at Brookwood. A lot of these guys that crashed on this side of the channel are buried at Brookwood. They don't end up in St Luke's at these later dates. They're all in the Canadian section at Brookwood. Yeah. And obviously there's a whole lot of them that are buried in France, and another large group that are remembered at Runnymede with no known grave, having gone into the channel.
Classic photo. Yeah,
no, this is the last two squadrons. This isn't taken at Kenley. We've got the temporary surface there, and we can tell from the pilots in the photo, some of whom are lost later on, that it's one taken down at Headcorn or Lashenden. There's 403 and 421, the last two squadrons that were here, stationed here, and they flew off middle of April. They're slightly delayed by bad weather down to Tangmere, when they put all the, started to live under canvas again as they had been in the summer, and everything starts to hot up for D-Day. Yeah. And at that point, everyone starts a big clean-up here at Kenley. Mobile disarmament units and a balloon barrage stops flying, because then the menace is the V weapons. Yeah. It's the whole, it's a game changer.
Looking at that day, 18th of April, so that's almost 80 years ago next week. Yeah. They all flew up.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was it for fighters at Kenley. Yeah. And bearing in mind that there'd been fighter squadrons here since the early 20s. It was, they were the last ones.
So Linda, this was how long in the making, in the planning?
This was quite a long time. I think 2022, we had a visit from the family of Wing Commander Godfroy, who we talked about when we were talking about George Burling. Hugh Godfroy succeeded Johnny Johnson as leader of the Kenley Wing. He was Canadian, he was actually born in Java, and his family were kind of Dutch extraction. And he arrived here with 401 Squadron in the autumn of 1942 as a flying officer. His girlfriend and wife was a cipher officer at Biggin Hill.
Right.
And so when the squadron was rotated out of Kenley and going up north again, he didn't want to go up north again. He wanted to stay down here, and he asked to transfer to 403 Squadron, who were looking for experienced pilots. And whatever, he ended up staying at Kenley. So basically, he stayed at Kenley from kind of like the autumn of 42 right up until the spring of 44. And during that time, he rose up the ranks to command the wing, became a father, becomes an ace, makes his first kill here and becomes an ace here. We talked about how kind of condensed life is at this time.
Yeah.
But he goes through so much while he's stationed here. And Isabel, who came to see us, his eldest daughter, she was born during the time when he was stationed here. And in fact, it was at the officers' mess that he received the news that she'd been born, and all the telephone operators on the that were connecting the call, all kind of like at the end of the call, they all stopped the call and said, "Oh, congratulations, Commander, congratulations!" And all this, and he was really sort of touched by it.
What wonderful story.
So it's a he has a huge connection, and when they came around the airfield, we took them to Biggin Hill, and we spent the day with them, and showed them everything. And they kindly offered us a little bit of money at the end of it, and we said, "Yeah, we're gonna plant a red maple tree because of the centenary," and we thought it would be a nice living tribute to that link with Canada that goes back so far now.
31st of March, we had the ceremony.
Yeah.
And we're now a couple of weeks later.
Yes.
And we've got leaves and growth.
We've got
really
leaves.
good, isn't it?
And it's a beautiful tree. And we've had great support from the ranger team, the City Commons ranger team, who allowed us to plant the tree and helped us with the tree guard and the plaque and everything. They've been amazing.
And we pinned these on at the time.
There's one each for all the fallen airmen that we saw going round the trail.
Really nice touch.
So they've all got their own little posy on the tree guard.
Fitting place to finish. So thank you very much.
Thank
you,
Phil. Thank you.
Brilliant work done. Once again, I recommend people come along and visit, and it's a really good stroll round at your leisure, taking all of the information.
And it's level and it's all hard standing. If you park down here, there's the ramp coming up. So actually it's quite accessible.
So make that a date for your diary.
Or you can bring your bike or your dog.
Or all of them.
Yes.
Until the next time, and until the next time there's something going on here, I'll thank you for watching and see you in the next one.